Hey everyone who is joining us for this webinar, whether it's live now or later on demand. It's so great to have you here, and thank you so much for joining us. Microgrid Knowledge and T&D World are pleased to bring this event on creating a stable digital footprint in dynamic field environments. This webinar is sponsored by Fulcrum, the company which has helped so many in the field with data, dissection, analysis, process in the electric and power utility sectors, and so much more. My name is Rod Walton. I am the managing editor of Microgrid Knowledge and EnergyTech.com, which, along with T&D World, are part of Endeavor B2B. I'll be your webinar host for today, as this session tackles key issues that electric utilities and O&M service providers struggle with to deal with when GIS and asset data do not reflect the real world or current field conditions. Before I introduce our expert presenter from Fulcrum today, and he takes over, I have only a few small housekeeping items to go over just to help ensure that you have the optimal experience with our webinar platform. First of all, if you're having any technical difficulties, and hopefully you can hear me, just look for the question mark link on the left side rail of your platform. Click that, type in the problem that you're having, and then hit submit, and our technical expert will help you out. We also recommend that you disable any pop-up blocking software or extensions in your browser, as these can cause issues with the webinar player. Additionally, we welcome your questions for our presenter during today's event. Jake Freevold, who is our expert from Fulcrum, will answer as many questions as he can during the Q&A session that follows the main presentation on up to the top of the next hour. But please feel free to send those questions in at any time. To do so, just find that question mark icon, click it, type in your question, hit submit, and you will be in the queue. Also, please be aware that today's session is being recorded and will be available on the Microgrid Knowledge and T&D World websites within the next 24 hours. That's microgridknowledge.com and tdworld.com. You'll be notified by email when that archive is available. To refer a colleague to today's discussion, save it on social media, share it, or access event resources, click the icons on that left side of the rail that I mentioned before. We're happy when you share that, and it really increases the circulation of important contributions such as this by industry leaders such as Fulcrum. And this webinar explores the prerequisites for achieving ground truths needed to manage complex logistics and compliance priorities in the field of energy assets. Jake Freevold will be our guide on that journey. He is Vice President of Product Marketing for Fulcrum. Jake's quarter century of experience in this field has covered the technology as it's evolved and modernized, now more than ever with AI and other predictive analytics. His career in software has embraced multiple technologies with a focus on data management and analytics. Jake earned his bachelor's degree in electrical engineering from Cornell University. Ever heard of it? And he lives with his family on Long Island, New York. So that's all I've got for now. Let me turn it over for the main event with Jake Freevold of Fulcrum. And Jake, it's all yours.
Great. Thank you, everyone. I am going to share my screen with you to give this presentation. If you've been to some of these presentations before, you may have seen that it's a different interface. It's because I'm using Google Slides. So let's let this come up. Today, we're talking about creating a stable digital footprint in dynamic field environments, and it's going to take a little bit of time to go through all the things that actually means. And this is the path that we'll take to get there. We'll talk about what it means. We'll talk about some of the data requirements, both in the field and outside of the field environment, that need to come together in order to make that digital footprint really work. Naturally, when we see those requirements, we'll ask ourselves, why haven't we done that already? And we'll see the barriers to achieving those requirements and how to overcome them. And then I'll take a little bit of a turn and say, well, if this is a significant issue, getting a stable digital footprint, what do the things that we've talked about so far have to do with putting together new technologies like, in particular, AI? And we'll show a specific vision of AI and how the things that we've talked about up to that point fit into it. And then finally, I'll do a little bit of a word from your sponsor about Fulcrum. So the first thing I'd like to note when we talk about the digital footprint that we're dealing with, when we say stable, that doesn't mean static. I don't know if you can see this, but the image is of the footprint on the moon. That's a very, very stable footprint that probably hasn't changed and probably won't for a very long time because there's no air blowing on it. But if there's anything that we know about our field processes and our organizations, it's that there's the equivalent of wind blowing on it all the time. We're dealing with constant change. So if we want a stable digital footprint, we're talking about a digital footprint that we can stand on, one that we can use as a way to build our additional processes off of, a way to execute on the missions that we have. So I just want to emphasize the fact as we start that when we're talking about a stable digital footprint, I definitely don't mean static. When we think about what that digital footprint needs to look like, we need to think about what kind of asset data specifically goes into it. And I want to talk about it across these three dimensions: the completeness of the data, the frequency with which we get the data, and the quality of the data. And dealing with each of those in turn. Completeness means exactly what it sounds like. There's a lot of information out there that different people make decisions on based on the type of information that's available to them. And it can include any one of these and many, many more different kinds of information. Rather than talk about any one in particular, I want to just note that some of them are specific to the individual piece we're looking at, right? There's an identifier for this particular transformer and it has a particular location. And then there are things that are a little bit more general, like what type of thing is this? Because if it's a transformer of this type versus that type, then I'm going to have different maintenance requirements. It has different characteristics and so on. And then there are questions about history. How do I deal with where I've been with this asset and where I'm going with this asset in the future? All of those things fit into the idea of completeness with respect to any of the assets we could be talking about. Frequency is, interestingly enough, not just how frequently we update the data. It has to do with where we update the data, how frequently we're able to provide new information or updated information to your enterprise asset management system, for example, or to your GIS. If you're familiar with GIS, then you know in Esri, for example, there's something they call the utility network that helps you understand, how to route around a particular problem or what would happen if a certain substation failed, right? You understand that all of this data is encapsulated in the GIS. That's interesting, right? Because that means I've actually got two systems that are dealing with enterprise asset data, and they both have somewhat different purposes. One of them is more to manage the process of knowing what that asset is and that sort of thing, and the other is managing the analysis, specifically the geospatial analysis of what happens if, what does it actually look like and what happens if something changes. And then there can be other things that we don't typically think about as needing field data, but it frequently does. Billing could be one. Billing could be if you're working with, if you are in a utility and you're focused on your customers or members, or it could be if you are a provider, a service provider for the utility industry, and you're thinking about how to bill your clients, your utility clients. CRM plays into that. Customers play into that, and so on. So there's all these systems that we need to be thinking about. How frequently do they need to be updated, and what kind of data, what level of quality of data, et cetera, do they need to be updated with? And then the other thing that we need to be thinking about as we think about how we're updating is the formats and the protocols. So if you're talking to a person, if you've got a customer and you're dealing with a person, frequently they'll want a report. So the frequency with which they get a report, is it something that happens as an event occurs? Is it something that happens on a scheduled basis or so on? Similarly, when we're making decisions, we think about dashboards. When we're thinking about this integration across systems, we're frequently thinking about different kinds of technologies, protocols, and so on that enable that communication between systems. And I won't go into those, although if anybody has any questions about this kind of stuff, please feel free to ask. A little lower level than I'd worry about for the most part here, though. And then finally, there's quality, because we know that the data that we're supposed to get needs to be complete. And complete means complete for whatever task you have at hand. Certain types of tasks don't require the same data that other tasks do. So the quality is in some sense relative to the requirement of the specific person who needs the data. But what we do know about that complete high quality data is it needs to be consistent, or one of the definitions of it being high quality is that it needs to be consistent over a period of time. If I'm giving you the information about a particular pad-mounted transformer, then I'd better be giving you the same data about that pad-mounted transformer over time and other pad-mounted transformers to make sure that I'm able to make judgments about what's going on, that I'm able to properly answer questions about these things, and there are no gaps in the knowledge. What the quality comes down to is, how do I avoid these gaps in the knowledge? And that's also true with respect to the consistency with the systems of record. If the data in your EAM and your GIS are a little bit out of whack, that could be okay depending on what it is you're looking at, as long as you know that the stuff in the EAM is the system of record for that particular piece of data. Because that way, when you're pulling information back out, you know exactly what you're getting. You might want to look into it if there's a problem to see if that is a sign of a different, deeper issue. But the real issue is to make sure that you've got the systems of record with complete data, and then any data that you share is consistent with those systems of record to avoid as much confusion as possible. Now, that's a lot of stuff. Completeness, frequency, and quality of data is really important to get your digital footprint together. One of the things that we need to talk about in terms of getting that quality, consistency, and frequency is the people, the processes, and the technology that we use to get the data that we need. And you may have other frameworks of ways of thinking of this. People, processes, and technologies is a fairly common one, but there are some things that we can see with respect to the people that we're working with that I think highlight the fact that we're not getting as good of a data as we frequently could. And one of them is that there are not enough people who are doing the work of supplying that data. When I say not enough people on the job, I don't necessarily mean that you don't have enough people working. You may have plenty of people going out and doing maintenance, but who's actually supplying data? Now, we know that inspectors, by the nature of inspection, are doing data collection, right? They are gathering data. They're gathering specifically high quality data to ensure that the information that they provide is proper for any and all activities that follow. But what about all the other people who are not inspectors? What can we get them somehow involved? The GIS teams tend to be the ones who send out a team or a person to go and get specific information that's related to location. And there's a lot of asset data that they collect. They may use a tool to go up to a pole, do a pole inspection. They may, any kind of asset, they could go up and do that. But they're usually doing it through the lens of, where is it and how are my pieces of equipment or my assets geographically distributed? And that person is not a person who does installation and maintenance or vegetation management. It's just not the person who wields the chainsaw or the wrenches, So how do we get not just the GIS teams, but all the other people also collecting that data? And the same thing is true with safety teams. And I talk about them because they tend to get somewhat ignored, because ignored is the wrong word, but they have less clout within an organization because they're seen not as a revenue source or a way to derive revenues from somebody, but they're seen as almost a necessary evil. And I say this with all respect for safety teams. They should not be seen that way, but they always seem to get deprioritized. So when they do get a chance to go out, they're typically a little bit overworked. They typically don't have the kind of infrastructure that a lot of other teams have. And they're collecting information about the safety specifically. They're not really as focused on what the transformer asset number or asset ID is. They're focused on whether or not a proper lockout tagout was done before working on the equipment or whatever it may be. How do we get all of these people working together alongside everybody else who's out there in the field? The people who are wielding the chainsaws and the herbicide to do vegetation management, the people who are doing the installations of new equipment in a new subdivision, the people who are doing emergency repairs. Like, how do we get all of those people to be like the inspectors and the GIS teams and the safety teams who are out there to gather data? That's going to be a significant question as we go forward. Processes. The issue here, in from what I've seen, talking to customers, talking to people, is not that we have bad processes. We know what the processes are supposed to be, but they're weak in the sense that they could be inconsistent because you have different clients if you're a provider and you a service provider, and so you treat this utility in Oklahoma a little differently than you treat this utility in Texas, right? They're just a little bit inconsistent, partly because that's what your customers like. Or it could be inconsistent because you've got different team leaders doing different things, or different parts of the organization who've been involved. Very often they're inconsistent because when you're doing data collection, the process by which you do that data collection is in the head of the person who's doing the work. They know the individual bits of data to be collected, but there's no definite sequence to do it. We see this a lot, especially with paper checklists. People will check off the boxes in whatever order they see fit. The processes can also be a little bit weak because we don't have the level of quality assurance on them that we'd really like. And so how do we then lock down all of these asset-oriented processes so that they become not weak, but stronger, good, more solid processes that have greater consistency, where there's deviation, that deviation has a reason, and that deviation is manageable, where it's not in somebody's head, where there's a specific sequence of steps to follow and people can follow that with confidence. And we're able to see the QA back at the office. We're able to do the QA maybe remotely. We're able to ensure that the quality assurance is at the level that it needs to be in order to ensure that good data is coming in. And then finally, from a technology standpoint, one of the biggest issues that we see is weak process integration. And we see that process integration weak across a number of different things. Business domains is one, and I would put business domains, I would include in that geographic domains. I was just talking to one of our customer success reps who was dealing with a situation where they've got some people in my territory, Long Island, New York. They've got some people in upstate New York. They've got some people in 2 other states. And those parts of the organization don't really understand each other very well for some specific problems. You would think that the knowledge of what to do for a particular problem would be very similar across those organizations, but each one is just enough tweaks to make it complicated when you try to bring them together and say, tell me about your process. So those business domains, they can be in, distribution versus transmission versus generation. They can be microgrid versus traditional grid. They can be geographic, a bunch of different ways that we can slice that tomato, if you're into slicing tomatoes. Another big disconnect is between the field and the rest of the business. The rest of the business lives in an office, and they don't fully get the field. I've talked to people at a couple of conferences where they are supposed to support the field, but they don't even really know the names of the people who are in the field. And that disconnect can be really complicated. Well, how do I have technology that is going to support the field run by people in an office if they don't really understand the requirements of the field? And then finally, some question about between companies. Again, this could be between you as a service provider and your utility companies. It could be between you as a utility company and your service providers. What kind of communication and process integration do you need between your companies in order to make things work the way that they need to work? So bottom line, what technology do we need? We're going to have to get to that question too. Now, some of the technology requirements that we have for superior data are pretty clear because we've spent decades building them up. If you look at all of the different kinds of systems up here, many of their own 3-letter acronyms, right? Safety management system, enterprise resource planning, field service management, whatever. All of these different platforms exist because we need to have a place for enterprise leadership to manage their processes and data. So when we look at each of these individual enterprise systems, enterprise applications, platforms, whatever you want to call them, when we look at them, we have to recognize that this is really a business domain. In enterprise asset management, there's a person whose job is to manage the assets of the enterprise, and they have this technology in place to manage their data and manage their processes and standardize them according to their requirements. Right? They have the responsibility, therefore they have the authority as well, one would hope. And this is true for all of these different domains, which is kind of interesting because they're all related to each other in different ways, but they all have an owner and somebody who is more responsible for it than others. Now, a lot of people look at these list of acronyms and say, well, that's IT. And that's not entirely true because IT definitely has a role, and IT is a very important role, but the processes and data inside each of these applications is really owned by the business domain. The business domain, the person who runs asset management, says to IT, I need the following integration to occur. Please help me. And IT will execute on that requirement. They will also execute on things like security and helping with reporting, all kinds of different things. But the basic processes that get put in place are managed by the business. And part of the role of each of these different kinds of systems is to put as much of that power into the hands of ordinary workers in asset management or field service management or whatever as they possibly can. They want as much control there as they can get. So to me, this looks like not a set of business domains, but a bunch of individual like functions or something. And so the question is, well, if these are business domains, if there's a business owner of asset management, a business owner of field service, then these should feel more like business domains to me, but it feels like a lot of IT stuff. So what's really going on? And part of that is that we just need to take one more step back, one more step up. Now we're going to need to marshal support from all of these people in leadership, but we're going to do it probably around certain programs first. So if we're dealing with something like undergrounding, for example, we will see the planners and the program management organization ensure the success of undergrounding. They're going to say, here's what our requirements are, here's the kind of support I'm going to need, here's the way that I'm going to manage assets for undergrounding. They're going to call on the various enterprise platforms to execute the functions that those enterprise platforms are designed for in order to support undergrounding. So I've just taken your little boxes and I've made them into wedges, but it's the same idea. All of these people are oriented to helping the undergrounding program. Now, I say oriented to helping undergrounding. They're also oriented to everything else that the business does. So it's not like this is the only program that these people need to worry about, of course, but it is one of the major ones. And because it's one of the major ones, they will have some priority here. This could be replicated across every kind of business program you've got going within your organization. And there's typically some kind of integration suite in the business that orchestrates cross-platform activities. For example, if you're using Esri ArcGIS for your geospatial information system, then odds are pretty high that you're going to be using Microsoft in order to do the communication between the GIS and other things. Sometimes there's more than one of those integration suites, right? So you might use Power Automate, Microsoft Power Automate, that's the full name, with Esri, but then you're using IBM for something else, and that just happened to come along with some different middleware, and so there's a connection point between different middleware. This is simpler than, sorry, this looks on the screen simpler than it usually is in practice. But we've tried to simplify by bringing together an integration suite that orchestrates these kind of cross-platform activities. That way, the platform that you're working with, GIS or EAM or whatever, is talking to one thing. And that one thing is communicating with the undergrounding program and sending responses. Or the undergrounding activities are initiating something somewhere. Maybe there's a work order that gets initiated. That work order is being initiated by someone in the undergrounding program, and that ripples through the rest of the systems that are there. So this is not what Fulcrum does. So this is a requirement that is outside the scope of a lot of what I'm going to be talking about, but this is a crucial part of making sure that you have a solid digital footprint for the kinds of activities that you're engaged in. Now, when we do look at the field part of the organization, it starts to get a little bit complicated because you also have your individual, I won't call these program level items, but these are subsets of those programs where you need to look at and say, okay, I need to do an environmental assessment, for example, in order to do undergrounding in this area that I'm working in. When that happens, there are a number of steps involved in creating that environmental assessment. And when I do each of those steps, I need to interact with the same things that the undergrounding program works with. I need to interact with all of these different kinds of platforms. And one of the challenges that the field faces is the fact that there's no one way to do that for everything. So your first step might involve some safety requirements and some asset management requirements and some GIS requirements, right? Those three things. And when it does that, you're going to use 3 different mobile apps in the field in order to capture the data for each of those items. So the person in the field has to know, okay, well, I've got to go to my safety app and then do the following safety steps. And then I need to go to my EAM app to get all the information that I need to about this particular asset. And then I need to go to the GIS to be able to capture some of the information there too. And some of that data is redundant. Some of the processes you go through to get that data is redundant. And this is where the process is kind of in my head comes from, because your process inside the asset management app might be pretty clear. Like that might be nailed down, but the skip from the safety app to the to the asset app to the GIS, that part might be something that you're not checking off on a clipboard, or that is not managed for you on the mobile device. That might be just something that happens in your head. Now, data redundancy, data quality, you're more likely to mistype something if you're going to do it more than once, et cetera, et cetera. There are opportunities for that to happen here. And that's just on step 1. Step 2 is going to include maybe your CRM and your EAM. And step 3 is going to include a couple things. And step 4 and step 5. And by the way, one of the problems we have is that sometimes collecting the data gets complicated enough and the mobile app you're working with doesn't really support it very well. So you do something on paper and then you get back to the office and you type the stuff from paper into a spreadsheet, and then you take the spreadsheet and upload it into something, and that's supposed to do some kind of spit and baling wire process to just do shenanigans to get it into the right place. It can be highly problematic to have this kind of environment. And that's one of the major blockers to getting a solid digital footprint for the field specifically. And that brings me back to what I showed before, right? I'm just highlighting one of the lines that I said before. The people who own these business domains own these systems to standardize their processes and data. And when we look at what this does, we have to wonder, okay, well, where's the standardization of the field processes and data? Where is the field platform in all of this? And that's where I'd like to go with a significant part of the rest of this discussion. We've talked about the people, the processes, and technology, and we've seen some of the barriers to getting that great asset data. Now let's talk about how to eliminate some of those barriers. We'll do that by coming back to the discussion of those barriers, taking the questions that we already asked, and now I'm just going to pop them up to the top of the screen so we can start over, right? So we can figure out how to just blow past these problems. We can get these questions nailed down. So when do we get to leverage all the other people? You remember that we talked originally about having inspectors and safety people and GIS people. Well, what about everybody else? What about the guy who turns a wrench and the guy who wields a chainsaw? We get better data when everyone who interacts with an asset updates the data about that asset. So, right, inspectors, we already talked about them. They collect data. That's what they do. But tree trimmers also collect data. They are underneath a particular asset when they are doing some of the work that they do. And being able to say, okay, I was at this place, look up, did I see any problems during my safety check, for example? Did I see any problems with the transformer? If no, that's information, that's data that we can use to help understand the condition of that transformer, of that pole, of the insulators on the pole. An engineer who goes out to do preventive maintenance isn't thinking of themselves as collecting data necessarily. They're doing maintenance. But as they're doing maintenance, they know what piece they're working on. They know what maintenance they're performing. And the fact that they're doing it and the fact that they're seeing all these different elements of an asset gives them information which can then be passed on to you for free. And that's really the goal here is I've got people doing the work right now already. How do I extract the maximum amount of so-called free data from those processes? The answer is to get everybody in the field working on the same kind of technology to be able to pull all of that information in the same way to the same place. The second question, how can we lock down all of these asset-oriented processes? One of the ways that we can do that, perhaps the most important way we can do that, is by helping the field manage its own processes and data the same way that the office has always had the ability to manage its own processes and data. So I think of the process I talked about before, where you've got multiple apps and it's in your head as far as how you're going to do it, or it's on paper and it's in your head as far as what order you're going to do it in. We need to find the shortest distance to go from what's in my head to something digital that can be consumed by the rest of the enterprise. And along the way, as we do that, we need to find a way to make QA a lot easier, because once we as an organization have decided how to capture that information and not just have it in your head, then it becomes easier for people to say, okay, this is exactly what I'm expecting. And based on that, I can have automated rules that show me that I'm good. I can have validation rules that prevent bad data from getting in there in the first place. And I can do a sampling maybe of data especially for my new workers who need more QA time than others, and make sure that I'm looking at that remotely so I can see exactly what's happening and how good my data is going to be. What we're trying to do with that is to eliminate the barriers that are currently in place to field consistency, having to do with those multiple apps, using the paper, using the spreadsheets, using all of the different challenges that we've talked about so far. And that leads us to the technology question. What technology do we need? If we're going to try to find a way to help the field manage all of its own processes and data, one of the things we need is a place for that. And I've already talked about the fact that business domains already have that place. I've already talked about IT's role, which is critical. I am not in any way disparaging IT, and I want to make that very, very clear. IT should be your friend because they're really knowledgeable about things like integration challenges and security and making sure that you've got the right kinds of requirements for the mobile devices that you're working so they can run all the apps you're using. Like, they're really important, but they don't know what you're doing as well as you know what you're doing. So they need to be involved helping you to achieve that. And the more that you can do it or define it yourself, the easier your life will be and the easier their lives will be, and the better the two of you will work together. So definitely, like, be friends with IT, but have your own separate domains to do that in. And so the goal for me here is really, it's a basic business principle. Always push the solution for a problem to the greatest extent you can to the level that has it. So if you have an organization that is working on field tasks, let those people manage the field tasks. Again, IT should help. Standardization matters. There's a bunch of stuff we could talk about here. That's actually a big topic. But in general, that's what we want to do, is give the people who have the problems manage the solutions to the greatest extent they can. And that brings us back to this mess. And I do want to reorient because we're about half right here. We have the left-hand side doing what it's supposed to do. So I'm going to erase some stuff, that junk in the middle, and take the left-hand side and say, you know what? That combination of having a business platform to standardize process and data for a particular business domain is good. Working in concert with the undergrounding program is good. Now let's take a look at the right-hand side and see what we're doing wrong. One of the first things we're doing wrong is we're thinking about the environmental assessments kind of like farther out than the other. I'm going to get rid of the steps that are there, and I'm going to bring the environmental assessments in. I'm going to think about them in terms of the individual process, like asset management is a process and environmental assessment is a process. So I'm going to think about those things as kind of like the platforms that are off to the right side, or at least the processes that those platforms manage. Now we can think about those data and processes being in a field platform. Then when I say, okay, I have an environmental assessment to do, I can start to think about the steps. I'm now pushing those steps further out to the field, and they're all being managed by that field platform instead of connecting directly into all of the other elements that it would connect into. In fact, the whole purpose of that, not the whole purpose, but a major portion of the purpose of that field platform is to be able to get requirements from the undergrounding program, from the EAM and the GIS and the CRM, from all of those things, manage the processes that the field needs to do in response to those, including getting data from it, getting the appropriate data from the various systems of record, performing the steps necessary to execute a task, and then taking the results of those steps and pushing that information back into the other systems of record and into making it available for the people who are managing the undergrounding program. So now I've got a situation where I can manage those multiple steps that make up the environmental assessment, and I don't have to have some way of communicating with those other systems directly. I've got the platform to help me manage that. What this means is that every touch that you make can lead to asset data flowing from the field to the office appropriately. That environmental assessment on step 3, there's an asset management requirement. Because I've touched the asset, I have information about the assets, and I can follow a standard process to get that information back to upload into the asset management platform and the GIS and whatever else needs it. That means the enterprise platforms are going to update with appropriate field data all the time on a much more consistent basis. And the orchestration of the field-related processes across all of those platforms becomes easier. When a work order is generated, the field process platform can take over and say, okay, well, now I know the steps that I have to do in order to get the information I need to get. Some of that information is going to be for the GIS. Some of that information is going to be for the EAM. Some of that information, frankly, is just going to be for the field team. If you think about a field team that, maybe the team leader says, I'd really like my field team to do a little safety walkabout before they do anything else. Can I get a video of that? If you have to ask the EAM person to put a video in for a safety walkabout, they're probably not going to want to do it. If you have to ask that of the GIS person, they're not going to want to do it. It's going to be deprioritized. It's a problem. If it's the field saying to the field, hey, I want the field to have this, you're much more likely to get what you need done. So the orchestration of these field-related processes becomes better because you're giving each platform other platform what it needs, and you in the field have what you need. And all of that ends up giving you better, more timely, more accurate data. By the way, I've been talking about this as if the only things we have to deal with are internal, but there's actually an external component to this too. Maybe your first customer that you're working with needs reports. You're going to get that your customer reports. Another customer likes having data in a certain format, and you need to give them feeds. This is another way to manage the different kinds of requirements that different customers have, or regulators, or whatever it is that you may be dealing with. So I've been talking a lot internally, but I don't want to lose sight of the fact that there's also an external component to this that we should be considering while we think about how we manage this. Now, there are times when I talk to people about platforms and they'll say, oh yeah, I have a platform or something, and and we have to discuss what it means to have a platform. The apps that I showed you earlier are not a platform in and of themselves. The EAM mobile app is an app that is bolted on to the EAM platform. So the platform there, the database, the system of record is the EAM. The processes are the EAM's processes. They are not built for the field. You're not thinking about the field as much. They're thinking about what they need to do from the office to manage assets. So those bolted on apps are not the platform. Custom apps also aren't platforms, and the reasons for this are several, but I'll stick with just the fact that they tend to be very focused on a particular task. So then when you shift to another task, you don't have all of the infrastructure that's necessary to make sure that the first app is consistent with the second app. And that's true even when the platform that you're using is some kind of an IT platform. Microsoft Power Apps, again, is a really common one for this kind of thing, but that's really an IT platform. It's not field focused. It's focused on building, it's focused on developers building apps, not having field workers building apps. So it tends not to be a platform that is, it tends not to be a platform in the way that we've just described. What it ends up being is a cluster of individual components that give you the same problem you would have had if you were using those bolted on apps I talked about before. So when you have a field app, it needs to be IT friendly for sure, but it also needs to, it needs to be GIS friendly, because something I haven't talked about much this time around is how important GIS is to the field. But obviously the field platform needs to be very GIS friendly, but it needs to be something that field can manage more or less on their own. Yes, they're going to need help for specific things, but the field should be able to do a lot on their own. So let's put this into practice a little bit. Pole inspections are a very common requirement. They're already a form of data collection because they're already inspection. Inspections are inherently data collection, right? But and these different assets are already being observed. But what about the truck that you're getting into in order to go do your pole inspections that day? The driver vehicle inspection report is something that they have to do that would go into the safety management system typically, if there is one, and it ensures that the truck is in good shape and it has this much gas and it has all these different things. Yeah, but what about pushing that location, condition, fuel levels, all the different aspects of that truck into your ERP? Why? Because it's managing the various vehicular assets. It's managing the fleet. Maybe there's an EAM portion that's connected to that fleet. Planning and billing, this is going to be really important. What did I actually spend in a given day? Did I go, how much fuel was used up on this trip yesterday? That kind of thing. All of these different systems can use information that normally was just going to waste. This is free data, and data is money. This is like free money in that sense. Another example might be bore tester usage. If you're using the bore tester, that's just a normal piece of equipment, so you might not track that in the same way that you track your other assets, but the usage of the bore tester and the location and condition and all that stuff is also now transparent to everybody within the organization or out. And then finally, of course, if you want safety to be part of your culture, then you need to make sure that the safety steps are part of the process and not something that's just added on or something that somebody else has to do, or maybe it's a thing you do on a clipboard when you do the rest of your process on a tablet. It needs to be something that's embedded into the processes that you engage in, whether it's the PPE you're wearing, the lockout tagouts you do, like anything. It all needs to be in one place. One more, and which is about emergencies. And here, data obviously that you're getting to the field is critical. They need to know what's happening right then. So the ability for the platform to pull information is critical in that case. But the observations in the field obviously are equally critical to the office to know what it is that they are doing and how they are going to have to update their models to see what they are, what impact the emergency repairs have caused. The repairs and installations can update the AM just by following the process. Remember, the person wielding the screwdriver is the person who is also saying, yes, I've got the right part number here. That information can flow back into the AM. If they're doing a replacement, especially, that's very important. It's very easy for things to get messed up in the field with respect to, this piece of equipment going in place of that piece of equipment. They're identical, so it doesn't matter, well, which one is where? Now you know, because you're just following the process and getting that information. And importantly, the transparency of an auditable record of what you did can be crucial for FEMA because they want that data. It can be crucial for your local government, for your customers, and for OSHA and so on. And you don't want to have to rebuild all of those things. Having it all in one data source is really critically important. One important part of that is understanding when you've got multiple things going on. I was talking to a client about this just this week, where they were doing repairs, and they would do a repair of a wood pole, let's say, and then later on, the same government that they were working for was doing a replacement from wood to composite. Well, you can't drive back to the wood pole that you repaired after it's been placed by composite. You have to have that data caught up front, and you have to know what it looked like at a certain point in time. So having an auditable way to show what things look like at a given time, how much material you used during the actual emergency repair, and so on, all of that can be really useful when later on they come back and say, okay, show us what you did and how you did it and why you did it. Now, a platform, I said I'd talk about the way this affects AI, and I'll be honest with you, AI drives me a little bit crazy right now because it's a buzzword, but people don't seem to know why it's important. And the things that work for a lot of people, help me summarize this email, help me generate ideas for my report, whatever it may be, all of that stuff is cool for them, but it's not really something that's helpful for the field. And what I'd like to do is show a video, which I never do during presentations, except for this video. It's about 2.5 minutes long. And in it, the AI will be talking to you, the viewer, somewhat, and also interacting with a field worker who is engaged in a pole inspection. And the purpose of doing this is to help us think about what AI can actually do that's actually useful to real people who are doing a real job, and what it would take for the AI to know the things it knows in order to say the things it says to get the job done, to help the field worker get the job done correctly. So I will try now. If this all works, I will click this and see you in 2 minutes, 2.5.
Take a look with me at what the future holds when our field worker puts on his smart glasses with camera and microphone and gets started with his AI-guided experience in Fulcrum. We've arrived at pole 1734. Please look at the top so I can scan for issues.
Sounds good.
I've already guided him to the right power pole. Now I'll capture some information so he doesn't have to, still under his control, of course. No visible defects in insulators or other features.
I agree, log it.
I can help him remember what he needs to do.
Guy wire tension is good.
Okay, what about the guy wire covers?
Oh, right. Covers look good as well.
Got it. Ready for the pole itself?
Let's do it.
The pole tag should read 1734. It appears to be defective. Do you agree?
I agree. It's missing the 3.
Noted. Also, some cracking, but no major defects. Do you agree?
I agree. Log it. Hammer sound test.
There's more to all this than data capture. I help capture the right data with minimal effort, seeing what he sees, guiding him through the process.
Hammer sound is good. Probing below the soil line.
Just like I can help field workers with their jobs, I can keep the office informed of relevant field information.
Northern quadrant might need a second look. What's the SOP for reinspection below the soil line?
The manual says that potential defects should be reinspected and remediated within 30 days. Should I alert the office that pole 1734 should be reinspected using a shovel along with a pole tag replacement?
Yeah, do it.
The pole's inspected, the status is logged, nothing was missed. This is the future of Fulcrum. We're creating an AI-guided experience for every field worker. Last inspection of the day, pole 1735, 50 meters northward up this street.
Metal or wood?
Metal.
Sounds good. I'm going to put my belt in the truck and walk over.
You're due for a water break too. It's 87 degrees.
Good call.
All right. I want to be I want to be upfront about the fact that that is a vision for what can happen with AI, not something that we currently have available. But it's important to have that vision in order to guide the direction that you're going to be going in. But let's talk then a little bit about what this video means, where it all comes together. And to me, the most critical question about it is, where did the AI learn about all of the data that it had, including the data, the individual data points, and the process information that it had in order to act in this scenario? Like, if you think about one of the things it did, it asked, what about the guy wire covers? It has to know that the guy wire covers are part of the check, and it recognizes the fact that when you talk about guy wires, you should be talking about guy wire covers at the same time. That's both a data point. It knows that there's a data field that needs to be filled in, and a process point. I need to make sure that this part of the process is covered at this time. Where does the AI learn that? And in fact, what AI are you going to be using to do it? And my thought is that if you don't have a place where your field data and processes live, if you don't have a place where you can find those things, then the AI will not have a place to go to say, here's a full comprehensive understanding of what that process looks like. Here's a full understanding of what sanity checks I should be making, both on the data side and on the process side. Sanity check on the data side would be something like, the temperature reading is 22 degrees, and they say that's great, but it's in August, and you're in Texas. So, sorry, that was supposed to be Celsius. That kind of data check is just as important as that kind of process check. Not only will there not be a place for it to live if there's no platform, but there's a bunch of other little elements out there. Like there's a spreadsheet on Jenny's desk, and there's a Access database on Tommy's desk. And there's all of these different technologies that are building the processes that you're using. And not only will you not have one place to go for the data and process information, but you won't even have one single AI to go and do the AI work. Each one of those is probably going to have its own kind of AI associated with it. So we need to have a place for the AI to go so that it can find the process and data, process information and the data that it needs to know, including all those steps. Forgot to take off the animation there. This is a new-ish thing, but it's only new-ish. This is something that's starting to be recognized by people in the industry. Lynn Schneider, for example, who deals with data as a service and location and geospatial intelligence at IDC, has commented on the fact that some kind of location-enabled field process and data collection platform is a really important addition to the technological capabilities of most companies, because they're specifically needed to replace the outdated methods we use to manage processes and data so far. What I'd like to do finally, just to wrap up before we get to Q&A, is to just talk a little bit about Fulcrum. Today, I've been talking from a perspective. I work for a vendor, and you should always keep that in mind. But I work for a vendor that does what it does because we have customers who say that they need us to do what we do. So everything I talk about here is shaped by what our customers say about us. And with that in mind, we focus on this specific issue, the fact that field teams struggle with inefficient tools that cause more frustration than help. You think that you're giving them something useful by giving them that mobile app, but when it's one of 4 mobile apps they're going to have to use, it becomes a real challenge, and it causes a new source of frustration that they didn't have before. Our solution is to provide that field-first platform. And when we do that, we're focused like a laser on boosting productivity and streamlining operations. There's a lot of goodness and light that comes out after that, including the ability to do better analysis and having better asset data across the board and so on and so forth. But we're focused predominantly on the productivity and the streamlining of operations. We talked about a little bit about AI. I would be remiss if I just didn't mention what we're doing in AI. We've got some of these things happening already. For example, on the data collection side, if you think about voice to text, you can speak into your phone and it'll fill in a specific text field. What we really need is voice to data, and you can talk to audio fast fill in Fulcrum and it will automatically figure out what you said and how it should check yes no boxes and what part of a pick list it should choose from, and so on. And it does that without requiring any additional setup on your part as part of the process you're engaged in. Data insights is about analysis, and that's coming very soon. If you're with us, like listening to us next week, you'll hear about it. There is that real-time quality assurance and anomaly detection I talked about, or what I called sanity checks in the video. That's coming afterwards. That's another follow-on to that. That interactive guided field workflow is coming beyond that. And then finally, integrating with AI and AR-enabled field glasses is going to be an important part of that. I'll be honest with you, there's technology that has to catch up to us. Like Zuckerberg needs to get his act together if he wants the Meta glasses to be suitable for the field, to do the kind of field work that they do. But we're looking forward to that, and we're working with them right now, and Google Glasses and so on, to make sure that we can hit this vision. With that in mind, if you are around for DTech next week, or if you're around for Geo Week a little bit following that, I'd be happy to see you there. Otherwise, I can open the floor back up to Rod and we can take questions.
All right, sounds good. Great job, Jake. You can hear me okay, right?
I can, we're good. Let me turn off my screen cam here. Go ahead.
All right. Well, good. Excellent. Well, so it is now time for a little Q&A, and we've got a lot of questions in that may take us to the top of the hour. But for the audience, please feel free to go ahead and send questions in. We may be able to get to one. If not, it may be that Jake can get to them later with you.
We'll be happy to do that.
Yeah, excellent. Well, as I said, you can send them in then at any time up to the top of the hour. And so let's get started here, Jake. First question up is, our field platform is Esri, but you have GIS with the other platforms, and why?
Esri is a geospatial platform, not a field platform. A lot of people use Esri to do analysis. For example, I mentioned their utility network. Esri is an incredibly powerful platform, but its purpose is not to help the field per se. It's to manage geospatial information. So there are a lot of processes. For example, a safety process, you would probably never put that into the GIS. You don't need to know that inside the GIS because you won't do geospatial analysis around it. The most you might put in is something more like a pass-fail. So yeah, just we can take that further offline if you want to, but the field platform needs to be the place where all field processes reside, and the geospatial elements of that is not everything that needs to be held in a field platform.
All right, thank you. Who controls making the work order?
That happens differently from different organizations. I didn't go into detail on that because it can change. In some places, you have a field service management platform like Salesforce that does that. In some cases, it's the IBM Maximo will initiate the work order. It usually will not be the field platform doing that, because that's not the field platform's job, except when there's an observation of some kind of a problem. So, and even then, we're usually a stimulus to which the response is create the work order. So from the field platform perspective, you don't have to care where it originates. You just know how to respond to it when it happens.
Okay, thank you. Next couple of questions are really great audience questions. The first one's kind of got multi-part, so hopefully I can sort of bring it together in a way. Shouldn't a project manager be assigned individually and be able to gather the info in this hub to supply to other departments who may need particular data, and not have the time to perform an analysis / query? Like, is it not an underground crew's main focus, the material costs, etc., that is attached to the hub of info, but someone may need to know the cost of an individual reel of cable, for example? I mean, there's a lot to that question. Hopefully I said it in a way that makes sense.
If I understand it correctly, then what I think they're saying is the project manager should be the one responsible for gathering the information. And that's true that project manager would be responsible for that element of his project or her project. The ideal situation, though, would be to make it as easy as possible for that project manager to get that information, where they can just click and look at it, where they can just pull up a report, where they can just where the act of doing the task collected the information that the project manager needed. And when that happens, then the project manager wastes a lot less time chasing things down, and instead gets a lot more ability to manage other parts of the project, because the data is already there, and the data is there in a way that is repeatable, it's consistent, it's complete. So in the ideal world, the project manager would be a primary beneficiary of the additional rigor that comes with having that field platform, as well as being a beneficiary of the flexibility that comes with the platform, because when he or she does need to make a change to the process, they can make that change and still get all the rest of the information in the same way that they normally would, if that makes sense.
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that.
Go ahead.
Oh, I'm just sorry. It's not an underground crew's main focus, the material costs and so on. That's true. But if I can get information for free just because I know that they're using this much cable, wouldn't I want to know that? And then I don't have to collect it separately. I just know how much material I've used. And that's a huge benefit for everybody.
Yeah, that was a very valuable question. Great answer there, and thank you for that. So how does AI enhance safety? You kind of talked about AI at the end, and how does it enhance safety in the field as you see it going forward? I mean, I've been doing this a while. The grid's always been known for gaps in visibility on the GIS level, and does this technology, or is it already, and does it have the capability to really improve those blind spots that are out there?
I think it has the potential to do so, because you can see if you've got a lot of data. AI always requires a lot of data, right? If you've got a lot of data that shows where things typically happen, where the gaps might be, where under what conditions things typically happen, accidents or incidents happen, then AI could predict that a certain kind of situation is likely to be more dangerous than another, or a certain team is likely to have a harder problem than another, or a certain person is more likely to slip up than another. It can actually suss out from a lot of different factors what might make this person or this issue a bigger issue than others. I haven't yet seen, maybe because I haven't looked at it closely enough, but I have not yet seen a place where AI is directly affecting it in that way, but I can absolutely see the potential for it there.
Yeah, it seems like the sky's the limit on that, maybe. So there's an attendee seeking a little more clarity on some points that you made earlier, but the question is, does the field platform integrate with the other integration platform or with the other enterprise apps, is the question.
Typically, if you have an organization where you've done a good job of doing enterprise integration using, a small number of integration brokers or business process management tools or what have you, then I would say the field platform should almost always do the same and interact with that BPM tool, business process management tool. If you're in an environment that's a little bit more hit and miss that way, then you're probably going to have to interact with the platforms directly. The best way, in my opinion, is to go through the BPM tool of some sort to make sure that that's all as standardized as humanly possible. But it really is going to depend a little bit on your particular situation, your culture, like how strong you are in that skill set right now.
I think great answer. We got time. We'll work in two more questions, Jake, and then we probably need to go out. And I know there's others in there, and you'd be willing to get into those later. But so this one actually may be more of a comment, but it's kind of interesting, and maybe you can speak to it. And the query from the attendee came in as allowing those with the problem to implement the solution is okay as long as IT is a partner in the implementation. Otherwise, architectural chaos can ensue and technical debt accrue. And he ends it by saying, "Yeah, I'm an IT guy." So,
yeah. So, yes. I said get close to your IT guys. One of the things that they can do, like, so let me back up the truck a little bit. The platform itself architecturally makes sense. You can build an architecture with that in place. The individual processes, I think, is where the IT guy has some specific knowledge that can really help a company not go off the rails. Standardization of data points, right? The IT guy is very familiar with the fact that when you've got two different people defining what a date looks like, then you're going to have 3 or 4 different date formats, right? Similar kinds of things can happen with any kind of process management or data collection. So if you've got somebody from IT kind of looking over your shoulder a little bit, thinking about best practices, saying, hey, you know what, we could do, we should build this process out, but you should be thinking this way about it the same way that those guys are thinking about it. Or if you think your way is better, you should convince them, because right now you're on a little bit of a collision course here. And we've had that, like, I think IT is a good resource for that, assuming they have somebody who understands that pretty well. We provide managed services, and very often the managed services are there in part to manage that part of the process. It's really not the field understanding the field work, it's understanding the field. It's helping the field understand how their field work gets translated into ones and zeros a little bit. You can do it. It's best not to do it naively. The getting that IT partner, I think, is a big help. Absolutely.
Okay. Well, I said we're going to do one. I know we're up past the top of the hour. We'll just ask this real quick, and then we'll
Sure.
head out. And I love the color on that one. A great comment by the attendee and great answer on that. So the last question, Jake, is can I just use the data lake as the source of field data for the AI?
The question comes from the fact that when people want to bring a lot of data together, they'll throw it into a data lake, and therefore it should have everything that you need. And so why can't the AI go and look at the data lake? It's not an unreasonable question. The problem is that data lake is data, right? It's really the nouns involved. And so you have a lot of, information about what you might have information about what's anomalous or what's not anomalous, but there are no verbs in it, or very few, relatively speaking, verbs in it. You don't know what the steps were in the process that took place in the field to get you that data. You don't know it as well. So the AI is not going to have nearly the ability to streamline your processes, or to make sure that you're taking the right steps in the processes, or to make sure that you're doing the steps in the right order. So you'll get some benefit from the data lake, but you will not get the level of benefit you get if you have both the process and the data together in one place.
Well, fascinating context around that, Jake. And I know we could probably go on another 30 minutes around some of this, but I'm afraid we've run out of time. So I'm so glad our audience could join us. This live event has been recorded, and it will be available on demand within 24 hours once it's archived. This webinar will be available for about 6 months after the live event. So please feel welcome to share it with coworkers and friends in the industry. We really appreciate it when you do that. And it will include a PDF of Jake's slideshow as well. And that concludes today's presentation on creating a stable digital footprint in dynamic field environments. I want to thank Jake Freewald, who is Vice President of Product Marketing for Fulcrum, for doing a great job and help us understand this very current and ever-changing environment around the grid and beyond, even in distributed energy assets as well. And thank you to our sponsor, Fulcrum, for that. Fascinating to hear these use cases. I want to thank our audience for attending again and for your questions. We all learn from each other. And with that, we're going to end our webinar presentation today. I'm Rod Walton, Managing Editor with Microgrid Knowledge and EnergyTech.com on behalf of T&D World as well. Thank you for joining us. Hope to see you again on a future webinar in the very near future. Have a great day, everybody, and goodbye for now.